Good morning, everyone, and welcome. We are delighted to have you join us this morning. Happy Friday to everyone. This has been a challenging week as we all anticipated the verdict regarding George Floyd, the funeral on yesterday for Deontay, the killing of Ma'Khia Bryant this week in Ohio. It has been a challenging week. So we are excited that you are here, that we can engage one another and have a space to interact. I am the Reverend Dr. Geraldine Eulenberg, filling in for Reverend Teresa Smallwood today. She sends her greetings on behalf of the Vanderbilt Divinity School, where Reverend Dr. Emily Towns is the dean, and the Public Theology and Racial Justice Collaborative, where Dr. Towns is the director and Reverend Dr. Teresa Smallwood is the associate director. We welcome you to the Mobile Institute in Ohio. We have an exciting day planned. This morning, our first panel will discuss issues of race and gender and last until noon. This afternoon at 1 p.m., our second panel will discuss economics and politics. Between these two events, we will have an exciting concert with the group known as Hue People. So while you're checking emails, eating lunch, and doing a variety of other things, please tune in. You will sign out of this particular session and sign into the afternoon link in order to enjoy the concert as well as the second panel this afternoon. Let me now introduce the moderator for our first panel this morning, Reverend Kima R.H. Cunningham is an ordained minister, but she says first and foremost, she is a servant committed to preparing people for God's purpose and connecting people with God's presence. She's a serious student committed to unearthing those principles that form the foundation for living purposeful, intentional lives. She is proud yet humble, the pastor of Richards Chapel United Methodist Church in Troy, Ohio, where she is loving her people and growing their ministry. She also serves as the director of Interfaith Campus Ministry and Campus Pastoral at Central State University, where she conducts weekly worship services on Sunday afternoon, as well as conducting engaging Bible studies during the week. She's excited to also engage in this work with her husband. She's a lifelong member of a variety of ministries, and she is currently working and preparing to engage the Doctor of Ministry at Methodist Theological School of Ohio. Reverend Kima has a BA in journalism from The Ohio State University and a Master's of Divinity from Payne Theological Seminary. Won't you join me in welcoming Reverend Kima R.H. Cunningham?
Good morning. Good morning. Many thanks to the Mobile Institute of Ohio, to Dr. Teresa Smallwood, and also to Reverend Howard Wiley and my colleagues moderating the panel this afternoon and the talkback session on Saturday. If you weren't with us yesterday, the subject for this forum is We Can't Breathe: Racism as a Moral, Spiritual, and Public Health Crisis. Our objective this morning is to shed some light on the color of racial justice and the gender of racial justice and the intersectionality of these two constructs. I am honored to introduce this panel of incredible teachers, practitioners, and preachers and activists for our time together today. Let me introduce them. Reverend Dr. Susan K. Williams Smith, the founder of Crazy Faith Ministries in Columbus, Ohio, was formerly the senior pastor of the Advent United Church of Christ, where she served for 22 years. She earned her BA in English Lit from Occidental College and her MDiv from Yale Divinity School and her DMin from United Theological Seminary. She now serves as a national organizer and trainer for the African American Ministers Leadership Council, a division of People for the American Way, and is a communications consultant for the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference. Also co-chair of the Minority Outreach Subcommittee of the nonpartisan Ohio Voter Outreach Committee. Recently appointed to the board of directors for the League of Women Voters in Ohio. She served as one of the chairs representing Ohio in the Poor People's Campaign. As a community activist, Dr. Smith has worked with organizations to legislate a measure to prevent payday lenders from charging exorbitant interest rates, and most recently, to challenge the controversial Stand Your Ground law. Reverend Smith's nonprofit, Crazy Faith Ministries, aims to unpack and teach the concept of faith in a way which will empower people and enable them to reach far beyond what they believe themselves to do. She's authored a number of books, including her most recent, Rest for the Justice-Seeking Soul, and With Liberty and Justice for Some, the Bible, Constitution, and Racism in the United States. She's a regular contributor to the Dallas Examiner and the Wilmington Journal, and her work has also appeared weekly in the Washington Post and Huffington Post. She also has her own blog, Candid Observations, which concentrates on the intersection of race, politics, and religion, and distributes a Tuesday meditation to people nationally and internationally. We welcome Reverend Dr. Susan K. Williams Smith. Dr. Terrance Dean is an assistant professor in Black Studies at Denison University, receiving his PhD in Religion and African American Diaspora Studies from Vanderbilt. Dean earned his master's in theology from Vanderbilt Divinity School and is a John Siegenthaler Journalism Fellow from Vanderbilt University. He is a Tutu Desk brand ambassador for the Archbishop Desmond Tutu Foundation, and he also serves on the editorial board for the Columbus Dispatch, helping to bring awareness and visibility to marginalized groups of people, particularly people of color. His research interests include gender, sex, sexuality, Black religion and homiletics, rhetoric and communication, and Black cultural studies. Dean has written a number of articles on race, religion, and sexuality, and a special guest editor for a number of journals. He's authored a number of books, including Hiding in Hip Hop, On the Down Low in the Entertainment Industry from Music to Hollywood. He's also the author of Reclaim Your Power, a 30-day guide to hope, healing, and inspiration for men of color. Straight from Your Gay Best Friend, The Straight Up Truth About Relationships, Love, and Having a Fabulous Life, and Visible Lives, 3 stories in tribute to E. Lynn Harris. Dean has worked in the entertainment industry for over 15 years with artists like Spike Lee, Rob Reiner, Keenan Ivory Wayans, and Angelica Houston. Also has worked with television and film production companies such as BET, Paramount Pictures, Warner Brothers, and Sony Pictures. Dean's lecturing and workshops have been featured at noted institutions such as Brown University, Ohio University, The Ohio State University, Syracuse University, Rutgers, Long Island, and New York universities. He's also appeared across the country and internationally on popular syndicated radio shows, NPR, the BBC, Russ Parr, The Michael Eric Dyson Show, The Tom Joyner Morning Show, and The Wendy Williams Experience. We welcome Dr. Terrance Dean. Good morning. And Bishop Marcia Dinkins serves as founding prelate and CEO of Forever Changed Ministries, a non-denominational ministry without walls that seeks to break the sacred secular divide between church and community. She is also the founder of Black Women Rising, which centers the voices of Black women on healing for change through a social justice lens, using teaching and training leading to transformation. She also serves as part-time executive director for Ohio Interfaith Power and Light. A native of Detroit, Bishop Marcia owned and operated a medical and substance abuse facility serving unserved and underserved communities, and also contracted with the state to provide wraparound family preservation, and reunification services to keep children from being placed in the foster care system and to reunite them with their families. She's worked 23 years in the field of law, specializing in family law, tort law, and medical malpractice. In 2013, she moved to Toledo, Ohio, where she served as executive director for Toledoans United for Social Action, organizing a faith-based response on issues of racial and economic injustice, education and housing discrimination, environmental and climate impacts, jobs, and criminal justice reform. In 2016, Bishop Marcia led the Free Brescia national campaign with groups across the United States and Canada fighting for rehabilitation over incarceration for Brescia Meadows and other juvenile offenders. She's currently a PhD candidate at the Union College and University in Cincinnati, Ohio, concentrating on public policy and social change with specializations in Martin Luther King and women and gender studies. Currently holding an Associates of Arts from Oakland Community College, Bachelor of Arts in Interdisciplinary Studies, and a Master of Science in Criminal Justice Administration and Policy. She has presented workshops and lectures on social justice at Case Western University, Case Western Reserve, Bowling Green University, and trained clergy across the state on domestic abuse and safety planning. Bishop Marcia is known nationally for her work organizing clergy to engage on issues of healthcare, the social safety net, environmental and climate justice, racial, economic, and gender justice, and civic engagement. We welcome Bishop Marcia Dinkins. We are so excited to have all of you on this panel this morning, and we look forward to vigorous and robust discussion. I want to frame this discussion. I want to frame this discussion by opening with some thoughts about racial justice. The biblical text in Micah 6 asks a question, and what does the Lord require of you? To do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with our God. Based on the current concept of what justice is in our society, and I'd love to hear your definition of justice, how do we define racial justice, and how do we do it? We'll start with Dr. Smith. Need to make sure you unmute.
Okay, sorry. Good morning and thank you. It's an honor to be here and an honor to be with my sister Bishop Dinkins and Dr. Dean, whom I do not know, but look forward to getting to know you more. The definition of racial justice, I think, is it's a tough one because it doesn't exist. Racism, white supremacy is not just an American problem, it is a problem that is global. And in fact, America's race laws were used and have been used to define and create race laws all over the world. The Nazis used our race laws to construct their horrendous, system to exterminate people. But we, in this country, have been exterminating people from the very beginning. There has been no concept, no practice of racial justice because people who came here, white people who believed in their hearts that this country, God ordained white people to come to this country to create a country for white people. And they called their sojourn across the Atlantic Ocean their exodus. That was their exodus experience. And so they have felt compunction about exterminating first the Native Americans and then, of course, ongoingly Black Americans, and their thrust against, or their campaign against immigrants is historic in nature as well, and they've always been concerned about too many brown people. I mean, that's documented coming into this country. So there is no racial justice. There's a concept of racial justice that we have, that it should exist, and we base our belief on the Constitution, but actually that was never meant to apply to people other than wealthy white Protestant men. So I think racial justice is still a pipe dream, not only here, but around the world. It's around the world. And we cannot force it. They're talking all these laws. They want to change policing and all that kind of stuff. At the end of the day, the law cannot affect the heart and hearts of people around the world, including for our own people in Africa. African Americans and people of color have been stigmatized, dehumanized, and criminalized. And so they're all over the world. We are still looking for racial justice. So in my humble opinion, racial justice does not exist.
Dr. Dean, feel free to jump in.
Susan Smith just said it all. There is no racial justice. If we look at the Constitution, the only reason we have racial justice is because it's predicated upon property, that African Americans are once property. So if we go back to the Constitution, which she's illustrating, and which we were 3/5 human, we were actually property owned by enslavers. So racial justice only came about to give racial justice to those who were formerly once property. We have to dismantle the system of the Constitution and give us human justice. I think that's what we initially need to get back into, being recognized as human. Then we can get into the discourse around racial justice. So until we are recognized as fully being human in the United States, violence, all of these things that can continue to impact people of color will continue to happen in our country and other countries until all persons are seen as human beings, not under the guise of white patriarchal supremacy.
For the average, let me kind of follow up with that. For the average American who would probably disagree with you and say, of course, we look at African Americans as human. What would you say to that based on your comment?
We're not seen as human. I can refer you back to James Baldwin, who talks about In the Fire Next Time, because he juxtaposes African American citizenship and African American Negro. Negro is a juxtaposition from slavery. So the fact that he refers to himself as an American Negro in America, and he keeps this argument throughout the themes of his writing, what does it mean to be a Negro in America, not an American citizen? That's two different conversations. The Negro is still enslaved and is still property within the United States of America. We are still under the gaze, under the law, under the violence, under all of these type of institutions that continue to perpetuate the violence against people of color because they see us as violent beasts, violent groups, violent persons, not even persons, violent beings that are constituted under a constitution of animality. So because we're not property, we're seen as property as other animals. That is why they continue to feel as if they have ownership over our bodies, ownership over the way we live, and at this gaze that's upon us. The fact that they can shoot down Ma'Khia Bryant, the fact that they can shoot Devontae Wright, the fact that they can kill George Floyd on video without propensity, nearly 9 minutes, and not think that this is a human being, that he has his knee on his neck. So the fact that all of those illustrations continue to illustrate to us that we are still not seen as fully human beings within the United States Constitution or within white supremacy.
Wow. Bishop Dinkins?
First of all, let me say I'm glad to be here. Hi, Susan. Nice to meet you, Dr. Dean. So Kima, I'd like to kind of go back to where you started at. You asked the question prefaced around the scripture, which is Micah 6:8. Part of your question was, well, what is justice? The second part of your question is, what is racial justice? I have to agree with my sister and my brother here that there is no racial justice. And I feel like we are like flailing in the wind. We're fighting the wind and just wearing ourselves out, trying to fight something that we know you can't fight. You can't fight a social construct that was meant to socialize you and to put social conditionings upon you to keep barriers, to create these dividing lines or these line of demarcation between deserving and entitled and who deserves and who. But the other thing that I think about when I think about justice, it takes me back to when Jesus was on the cross, and we often overlook the small sentence that said, "I thirst." And after he said, "I thirst," he said, "It is finished." And so justice is just that. It's finished. Justice is, I don't have to keep fighting for something. Justice is transformation. It moves us from A to B. It is not something that, it's something that we confront, and we see it when we see Jesus walking, when we see Moses and all of that. But the one thing that I have to preface is that even when we look at it from a biblical perspective, even when it came to Exodus, they didn't leave out from slavery or being oppressed empty-handed. They left out with wealth. So that's liberation and that's justice. God, even in that scripture that you just referenced, if we did 1-7, he's already, speaking about justice right there. And I love how we have to really go backwards, because he's even using the elements to hold a trial or a case against those. So what I think about is, like, it's this form of religiosity. What we have to remember is that a lot of this has already been prefaced in religion. And so when we don't, and so all of what my brother and sister have said, we also have to go to another layer. There's this underpinning that these Christian identity movements that create a story, that say that, a story of purity that says that white people came because Adam slept with Eve, but Black people came because Eve slept with the devil. And so there's all of these other silent stories that continue to perpetuate, these constructs that continue to diminish us as Black people, or for people not to see us as Black people. So I have to say, because it's so embedded in so many things, and the conversation, be it silent, underwater or above water, is still about, we have no value. We are not seen as Black people. We are still seen as chattel and property to be commodified and objectified, and our children as Black gold and Texas tea.
Dr. Smith, unmute.
Okay.
There you go.
We do have value in that we are still on a plantation in this country and in this world. We are still making money for white folks. We are still doing it. I mean, the plantation has grown. It's not just in the South. So NFL, NBA, all of these sports organizations, we, the consumers, we are still making, so we have that kind of value. If the NBA was to shut down, and if the NFL was to shut down, and if we could have a boycott just of one something nationally over the country would change, because while they don't care about us as human beings, they do care about their money. And they do know that we bring them money. We made America rich. We built this country. We got them to where they can then, turn their faces on us. But we still have that power. And I think it's something, Dr. Kima, that we don't even realize, that we still have the tools to kind of shut this thing down and rebuild it from the bottom up.
I'd like to say you are so right. And just briefly, in reading the Willie Lynch letter, I don't know if it's in all volumes, the little short book, but one thing that I always think about, and what Dr. Susan brings back, is the letter that they wrote to Black people that expresses just what Dr. Susan, just said about how they thank us, for being able to build this country on our backs, how they thank us for consumerism and still, shopping in the places that continue to make them rich. So if anybody ever gets a chance, I don't know if it's in all volumes. I have a really thin volume where it ends with a letter to Black people thanking us for building this country, for giving them the wealth and continuing to perpetuate wealth for them in all of the ways that Dr. Susan just mentioned.
And we continue this conversation. Yeah. Justice, let me ask a question about justice. It's often looked at as a legal term, mostly related to law and the courts. But how can we begin to really look at justice as something bigger, something broader than just the legality? How does justice apply to morality? How does justice apply to spirituality? How does justice apply to public health? Anyone?
Well, I can start. Justice should apply to all of that. But I think what happens is that we rely more on the legal definition than on a moral understanding of justice. And at its heart, justice is a moral issue. It is a moral issue. And the fact that because of our economic systems, people value money and crave money and material things more than they crave a relationship with God with that inherent or built-in morality. Christian nationalism, to me, is not Christianity. I don't know what that is, but it is not Christianity. It is a system which uses the name of Jesus to sanction its practices of prejudice and bigotry and all that. Their theology, as Dr. Wright, Jeremiah Wright said, and I think Ched Myers have said, and I keep using it over and over because it's so profound, that your theology informs your anthropology, which then informs your sociology. So how you see God affects how you see other people, which then affects how you see society. And white nationalists see God as this power broker, as this militant, soldier-like person really, that inspires people to colonize, to conquer people for the sake of getting more wealth. It's so skewed, but that for them, justice is defined by your materialism, by your power, by your ability to defeat other people, to win at all costs. That's what that is. And that is a construct that is antithetical to Christian teaching. That is a construct that is antithetical to the religious teaching of all religions. When you look at God as defined by these other religions, God is a deity who demands, who desires, who wishes for there to be equity and equality and decency for all created people. That's not what Christian nationalism is. So I just think that this morality thing, we don't push it enough. And it's different from religiosity. It's not about, telling somebody who's going to hell and who's going, it's not about that. It is about that which God put in each of us, which has the capacity to show compassion and care for other human beings, no matter who they are, to, as Dr. Aubrey Hendricks says, to treat the needs of the people as holy. That's what justice should be based on and in, but that is not the case.
I think it's, she's absolutely right. I posed a question to my students in my class around morality and justice because we were talking about this conversation. And I said, do you think it was judicial or do you think it was a moral right of the officer who kneeled on George Floyd's neck for nearly 9 minutes? Was that a moral obligation that he had to see him as a human being? And how would the court of law view that? Or in the case of Ma'Khia Bryant, the law states that an officer has the right to shoot a third-party person if that person poses a threat to another person. However, if we look at that morally, does the officer have the moral obligation to intervene and to de-escalate the situation before enacting? So we put ourselves into these moral obligations and race judicial obligations, the law, legality. I don't think we can intertwine and undo all of that and try to say, well, how can we get rid of the judicial or the law out of our everyday lives? It permeates throughout all of our lives. The Bible is a book of laws, spiritual laws that are, and the Old Testament is nothing but spiritual laws. So we are bound by law. But how do we get to see each other as bound by morality? How can we be bound by human morality? And that is a question I think we should be asking ourselves, because we are all bound by some particular law from any institution that we're involved in. From I work in, the academia. And then the first thing they'll say to me was, have you read the faculty handbook? What does it say in the faculty handbook? Their book of laws. If whatever field you work in, they're going to ask you, have you looked at the faculty handbook or your staff handbook? What does it say in there? We're bound by these laws. So I think the question we should be asking is, what is the morality around human morality? Are we obligated around human morality? That's a bigger question. And what does that mean to see each other as moral beings? And I think that's something very powerful to consider and to put on the table. And we talked about this earlier in the last segment, the last question. to be recognized as fully human. To be recognized as fully human. And I think, I hate to redress, but also to move away from this conversation. We've moved away from naming white people to naming them now to some people as white nationalists, white supremacists, because it's very easy for white people to say, I'm not a white nationalist, I'm not a white supremacist. So I don't know who you're talking about because I don't do those things white nationalists and white supremacists do. However, you do because you're very complicit in your implicit biases, the things that you do when you talk about Black people, or the things that you do when you're in your workforce and you don't hire Black people, or how you mistreat Black people in the medical profession, or how you mistreat people, Black and brown persons during the COVID-19. I remember watching when COVID first began last year, and I think it was the governor of Mississippi or Louisiana, and he asked them poignantly, the news anchor man, why do you think the Black persons in your community are disproportionately getting COVID? The governor said, I have no idea. I said, you're on live television and you have no idea why Black people in your own state are disproportionately impacted by COVID-19? That says something very implicitly about your disregard or your displacement from and away from Blackness. So the fact that you're not that connected to your own constituents, people who have voted you into the position that you're in, that you don't have any type of regard or understanding of why they're disproportionately impacted by COVID-19, says something that you have a disengagement from people of color. So I don't want to say that it's not just white nationalism, white supremacy, and white, patriarchy. I'm putting white people all on notice.
So I'm hearing you say, Dr. Dean, it's this thing centered around white normativity, and so because it sits in white normativity, it just keeps on going because I don't have to connect until we get at the intersection of interest convergence. Then you begin to, I see some value in you and I have a little interest in you because I think I like how Bell Hooks puts it in Eating the Other. When they have these different dreams about, seeing Black people in some sorts as a rites of passage, or to eat or take on, certain things about us. And it made me think about the lady, who was the white lady, Bo Derek, back when, a long time ago. I think she wore French braids. At first they didn't like the French braids, they didn't like things about that identified as Black. But when Bo Derek wore the braids, then it was acceptable. Same thing, I hate to say it, and for chitterlings, same thing. It wasn't that chitterlings is a delicacy to Black people. We know we had to have it because they didn't, morally care about whether or not, or were concerned about whether or not we ate. But when it went on the Food Network and chitterlings became a delicacy, oh goodness, so it's like this thing around eating the other, usurping certain things to continue to erase and invisibilize the history of Black people so that we don't have to be seen as fully human or humanized. So we can just continue in some of the smallest ways to still take away those things that speak to your identity, and some of those things that connects to your story. So when I think about morality, I agree. We have to wrestle with the question that Dr. Dean puts forth. When I think of spirituality, spirituality for me is, then we're coming out of the flesh. We're coming out of the way that we want to see, and we're going to a different level, and so spirituality just means I'm coming out of all of this. I'm coming out of all of this shell, and I'm kind of reframing the way I think, because what I realize is that spirituality kind of puts us all on a level playing field. Mm-hmm. You don't get to see color. You don't get to see gender. You don't get to see any of those things. There is no bones of contention because we're all looking alike. And then when it talks about public health, the only way we're going to change public health, and it goes back to what Dr. Dean said, unfortunately, we are in a place of laws. We are in a place of order and structure, and that's for a lot of reasons. And I have to say that God is so, so sovereign and in control and all knowing that he knew that during the fall of human nature, that all of these things was just going to run amok anyway. So there had to be certain things put into place. But if we're going to look at public health, which we don't even talk about anyway, how are we defining public health? Because that's a really broad definition. Are we talking about clean air, clean water? Are we talking about the right to live? Are we talking about safety? And I think it all goes in there. But until we have a genuine concern for one another, we're never going to get to a place of any public health. Because this benevolent racism and this benevolent policy making continues to just, create this public agenda that's false in nature.
Benevolent racism. Benevolent racism. Wow.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah,
benevolent
it is.
racism.
Because benevolent racism, generally what happens is, and we don't think about it, when policymakers or legislators are really trying to develop their agenda, they feel like, because even the laws are basic, they're interacting or intervening from this patriarchal lens. And so they come in and they pull a little policy in there. It's still a racist policy, but we think that they've done something for us, when in fact it's just this benevolent racism. I'm giving of my, giving you something, but at the same time, I'm still recognizing and giving you something. I'm taking it away anyway because you don't deserve it. And so until we just come to this point of really being concerned and curious about one another, and it just goes right back to what Dr. Smith said, we're still going to be in these endless fights. We're still going to be in endless fights because we don't drive the moral imperative. Even from the churches, we're not speaking the moral imperative. We're not coming up and we're not standing up in a lot of ways that we need to. We're not speaking to the fact of how how religiosity needs to be broken down, and we need to start seeing people formless and just seeing people as they are. Thirdly, in order for public health to take place, we got to address all these other issues. Because these public health is connected to the social and moral determinants anyway.
And the people don't care about the public health of Black people. I struggled with, as COVID ravaged this country, I struggled with a belief, a suspicion, a fear that the administration kind of just wanted these people to die. I just struggled with it. I thought of it as another type of genocide. I thought that when the words got out that the people being most adversely affected were Black people and older people, that the powers that be said, okay, we don't have to worry about it. Now, I'm hoping I'm wrong, but in my spirit, I feel that way. And to me, it was, and this is language I'm probably going to get in trouble for, but it was like concentration camps without the actual ovens. That's what it was to me, just letting these people die. They didn't have to do the work of having like the mass murders of that we've seen in other authoritarian countries. But I think also that the reason this is so hard to tackle is because nobody wants to admit their stuff. If you are an alcoholic, you can't get cured until you say, right, I'm an alcoholic or I'm an addict. You have to say it. You have to own it. Americans don't want to say that they're racist. They will fight you. They will fight you. When in fact, at the very beginning of our beginnings as Americans, and those slave castles over in Africa, this breaks your heart, because they have dungeons, in the slave castles at Amina, where I was, and there's a dungeon in tiny enclosures, no windows, no air, no nothing, where they would stuff people. They had the men on one side and the women on the other side, and they would stuff them in there and keep them there until they were going to be walked through that portico to the ships, through the door of no return, and people would die in there. And they were so packed that they couldn't move, so they were standing next to people who had died, who were probably decomposing. But this is the thing, right over that dungeon there was a Christian church. And in the Christian church, it is said that the people worshiping, white folks, Anglicans, could hear the cries and the screams of the people in the dungeon and continue to worship God. That means that this disdain, this disrespect, this whatever for Black people is so ingrained in the souls of people who call themselves moral Christians. It's so deep that I don't even know how you get to it, because that's where you got to get to. We got to get to the stuff that makes them believe that it's okay to lynch somebody on a Saturday night and go to church on Sunday morning and take communion or even serve communion. You see what I'm saying? There's such a disconnect. And that's the kind of stuff that we have to, that's why we need to tear it up and start all over again. I don't know how we do that, but it's like, I heard somebody saying it's such a good analogy. If you bake a cake and you forget to put the baking powder in there, you can't take it out. Try to put that baking powder in there once it started to bake. It's already done. So if you take the cake out, you might want to sprinkle some baking powder over the top of it, but at the end of the day, you don't have a cake. You got a little piece of shortbread. That's what we have. We don't have a real democracy. We got, I don't even know what to call it, but you can't, I don't know how you get to that. And I don't know how you get to the hearts and the souls of people to make them see people of color, see immigrants from other, I don't know how we get to the point where we get them to have eyes that see and understand that we got blood just like you. We hurt just like you. We have needs. We are smart just like you. I don't know how we get to that, because it is so ingrained in our people.
Keep the conversation going.
And I think, and I need to shut up, but I think that one of the things that that's bugging me when we think about all these shootings of Black people, the reason that they come like they do is because they don't see us as human beings. There in this city, Micaiah Bryant, there was no reason, as far as I can see, that the police officer would have to shoot that 15-year-old girl 4 times. To me, that was like shooting a dog, a rabid dog, or a horse or something. I mean, it's like we don't even feel it. I know y'all know the story Howard Thurman tells about how once when he was a kid, he was raking leaves, and there was this white kid who kept coming and knocking the leaf piles down. That's some hard work. If you've ever raked leaves and put them in those little piles, that's some hard work. And finally, Thurman said to this kid, "Stop doing that." And the kid took a pen and stuck him in his hand. And Thurman said, "Ouch." And she was surprised. She said, "Why do you say that? You people don't feel pain." That's what I'm talking about. That is the core of the sickness of the souls of people in this country and in this world, as concerns Black people in particular, but people of color in general.
And I think many of us, struggle with trying to figure out if it is our responsibility. I think I was in conversation with someone the other day, just exhausted about explaining, exhausted about trying to deal with the stress, exhausted about wondering whether or not individuals were really looking out for my best interest. And so when we talk about this notion of trying to help the general society understand what this whole justice thing looks like, and as Dr. Dean was saying, humanity versus race, what can we begin to do, or what do we need to examine, and what is that moral imperative? Talk a little bit more about that. What is that moral imperative for us? And for us as individuals, for us as community, where can we begin that process?
I mean, I don't know. I think there's a lot of false morality around. People pick up stuff like, okay, so when I was a kid, my mama grew up holiness. So if you wore red, you were going to hell. If you wore makeup, you're going, that kind of stuff. That's kind of a false morality. And so we see things, the issues that people pick up, that if so last night, the Assembly to a Proctor Conference had a webinar and had these young LGBTQIA kids, and they were talking about what their lives are like. So there's the false moral imperative is that if you are LGBTQIA, then you are somehow a sinner. That if you, all these things, abortion is, that's like ultimate sin. Nobody ever says that racism is a sin. Nobody ever says that. I mean, not that morality. No, that's fine. That's what should be. And what bugs me is that even for the abortion thing, people don't even realize that that was born out of a protest of people who were angry at the government because the government was making stipulations that white colleges could not uphold their policy of segregation and get federal funds. So then the powers that be had to figure out another issue around which they could motivate their base, and they came up with abortion. And it is very interesting that prior to that, people like Ronald Reagan and all these people who, are the icons of, this conservative, moral movement, they didn't care a hoot's butt about abortion. But when it came down to trying to preserve funding for these colleges that wanted to remain what they were, then they brought that issue and it became an issue. So that is I'm calling it false morality. If you can't look and see that police killings of innocent, unarmed Black people is a moral problem, then something's wrong. If you can't look and see that incarcerating people for low-level, non-violent drug offenses is a moral problem, then that's wrong. We don't deal with those types of things. And I think I lost your question, but I just, you just inspired me to want to share that. I'm sorry.
Dr. Dean, you were coming in to say something. Unmute.
I was actually to repeat your question, if possible.
I think that we were just kind of looking at the notion of looking at justice as a broader term than just a legal term, and how do we apply justice to morality, to spirituality, even to public health? How do we apply, how does justice fit in with those areas?
I'm thinking about Toni Morrison and Martin Luther King's beloved community and what that means. And when they raise that question, what does that mean to be a beloved community? How does that apply to us? And I want to speak specifically just to us, people of color, because I can't address what white people think or how they behave right now. But for us as people of color, we have a lot of work to do within our own community. And that work does require, what does beloved community look like? Mm-hmm. And that's Dr. Smith just stated about LGBTQ persons and how we embrace and bring them into community. How do we embrace and love them into community? How do we share and uphold and love beyond the physicality, but as Bishop Dinkins said, the formless of identity? Because we are all formless beings who are still growing and learning and shaping and forming into ourselves of who we will become. It is the power of the church to help form a lot of that relationship, relational, spiritual. How do we build and grow from that? But if the first thing you hear when you are a young queer person is that you're damned and you're going to go to hell, your belief system becomes that you're already damned within your own community. So if you're already a damned being within your own community, then the world does not see you as a fully formed being. So how do we reconcile that conversation? How do we reconcile the women? Because I'm working on a book right now on First Ladies of the Black Church, because I recognize these women, if it wasn't for the First Ladies to get us through a lot of this, those men and all this stuff we have right now would not be working, manageable, or happening. Where do we have that conversation about the women in the church and their role in patriarchy? So we have to dismantle patriarchy that Black men tend to mimic from white patriarchy. So how do we address that? So this is my beloved community. So when I talk about beloved community, and I'm extending the conversation from Toni Morrison, from Martin Luther King, and all the scholars who've been writing about it, I said, we have to be willing to call each other out on a lot of BS that we've been doing. I should be able to tell you when you're wrong, and you should be able to tell me when I'm doing something wrong. And there's love behind it. There's love in it. It's not that I'm telling you this because I want to do some damage to you, or that because I'm trying to be harmful to you. It's because I love you and I want to see us heal and be whole And the only way that we can heal and be whole is to recognize and see each other and love into one another. And so I want to start within our own community. How do we do that work? That's a necessary work that needs to be done first and foremost. And the fact that, you know, and I want to talk about this one last thing. I know this thing is ready to jump in, but I've been seeing the debates around Ma'Khia Bryant and how some black people were saying, well, the police officer had it right. He should have shot her because she was wielding a knife, you know, and about to kill this other black girl. And I said, but you do realize that's a cultural thing that happens in black and brown communities. Black girls that I know when I grew up in Detroit didn't show up to fight one-on-one. They came in mobs and groups. Like, it's like, if my girl fighting, we all fighting. If my homegirl here fighting, I'm going to fight. And we're going to bring a battle. We're going to bring a bat. We're going to bring something to protect ourselves, because you don't know, well, how many other girls are going to be there to help jump in. And so the fact that Ma'Khia Bryant knew, she said, I have to call the police to protect myself, because there is this group of girls who are coming to fight me. That's a cultural thing that we need to talk about in our own community. Why do we see that as okay? This, you know, gang violence that we tend to see that happens in our community. That the fact that she knew that in order to protect herself from a group of girls who were coming to fight her, she had to get a knife.
So you said a whole lot that really takes us down from one block to probably another country. First of all, you know, that young lady was also involved in the system. And so when you're involved in the system and traumatized by the system, you have to you take on certain ways that you have to protect yourself. But I want to go back to what Kima had asked, and I know we're wrapping up, is around this moral imperative. And then what you were saying, Dr. Dean, around the church and patriarchy. The first thing, in order for us to do anything, and this is just my take on it, the church has to own what the church has done. The church has perpetuated trauma, and in perpetuating the trauma, they have not had a response to the trauma. And under the guise of restoration and reconciliation, the church has not offered any ways for us to restore as a faith community. Number one. Number two, I agree with you wholeheartedly. White supremacy and patriarchy sits on the pews as well as under the pews. And until we stop normalizing certain things like the big white Jesus in the black church that denotes or connotates you can't be saved unless a white man is saving you, we don't realize that we still carry and normalize the colonized language or knowledge through imagery, through our reactions, you know, through photography, because all of those things have also been used to colonize us. And so until we come to a point of realizing that the moral, which is the concern, and the imperative, which is the urgency, that there is a time for urgent concern, or as Dr. King put it, we are living in the fierce urgency of now, because yesterday is today. We're not going to get to this point. But part of the problem, and I'm done. Part of the problem is we have to confront ourselves, because like I tell people all the time, even if we did get rid of racism in the Black community, we have colorism. We still come and we butt heads with one another. They would see me and Dr. Susan as women who think we know all of that. I've been spat on by Black people. I've been spat on by white people. I've been too light to be Black, and too dark to be white. And so I was in my own identity crisis because of just what the crossroads that my people, my brothers, my sisters, my colleagues, my students put me at. And so I agree. We cannot dismantle anything if we're still using the master's tool in our own house. If we're still using it in a way that we're going to continue to bend things. They want to bend the Bible to fit how they want it to fit. They want to bend the word to fit how it fits. And at the end of the day, until we stop, and I'm done, until we stop our own isms, and declaring who's worthy to be saved and unsaved, who's worthy to come in the church and not be in the church, until the United Methodist Church realizes it's racism with the other Methodist Church, until the Catholic Church come clean and quit living two different ways. You got social justice on one hand, and then, oh my God, you got your own system, canonizing, and we're going to leave it right there. Y'all know how to fill in the blanks. But until we confront that, which is connected to spirituality, and break down and peel back those lines of religiosity, people gonna see us speaking with forked tongues anyway, because we're only perpetuating, normalizing, and re-narrating everything that we're fighting against anyway.
Wow. This is great conversation. And as I think about, I want to shift gears a little bit as we move into the second hour. In a February 23rd podcast from the Journal of American Medical Association, a physician tweeted a statement indicating that no physician is racist. So how can there be structural racism in healthcare? In recent years, much has been documented regarding the high infant mortality rate for Black babies. The CDC reported 2019 that Black, American Indian, and Alaskan Native women are 2 to 3 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related causes than white women. Recently, we've seen public figures like Serena Williams and Beyonce share their experiences of encounters with physicians who ignored their pain and were not receptive to dealing with their pain thresholds. So I'd like to kind of shift and talk a little bit about, hear your thoughts regarding gender and racial justice as it relates to public health, the intersection of gender and race, particularly as they pertain to public health. Anyone can start.
I'll start, because you are just rattling the windows of an experience that I went through. And when we talk about public health, I think we should just say health, period, be it public health or private health, because it's the private health care that is really pushing to not even treat us as Black people. They're lobbying so that if it goes against their values and beliefs, that they don't have to treat us. That's in our Catholic hospitals. Now, let's just get to our to the other hospitals. I went to a hospital. I was going into anaphylactic shock. I went into anaphylactic shock 5 times. The 3rd time I was hospitalized. This was still a woman doctor. And I think this is what you blew me back the most, because it was a woman doctor. It was a woman doctor of color. That doctor stood at the foot of the bed. She did not stand at the side of the bed. She did not examine me. She asked me, did I use drugs? I said no. That was the only thing that she asked me over and over again. When I told her, I come here all the time, look at my records, don't ask me again when the records speak for themselves. The second day in the hospital, I coded. They had to call the trauma specialist. She did not come for 2 hours. She did not come for 2 hours. And the nurse got angry, and they saw me going into shock. And she said, so now I had health insurance. She even discharged me to a homeless clinic. When I got home, I went into shock again. The EMS came to the house. Let's talk about the connectors to health. EMS came to my house. My face is swole up. My lips is swole up. I'm looking like I don't know what. I still have on my band from the hospital and my EpiPen in my hand. Do you know they wouldn't take me to the hospital? They told me that I had between 3 and 30 minutes to get to the hospital before I died. So when we talk about, when that physician says that it does not exist, not only does it exist, but inside of that comes all of these stigmas that they want to associate with being Black. Their reasoning for not taking me to the hospital, the 3 white guys standing in my face, laughing at me, wouldn't even triage me, laughing at me. Sat up there, and when I reported it, told their boss, oh, well, on the other side of that, where she lives at, because I lived in the historical district, on the other side where she lives at, they overdose a lot. So that goes to show you the stigma that I wasn't overdosed. I wasn't overdosing. I don't even use drugs. But even in that, and they were not even in, working with one another. But the only thing they saw me as a Black woman, and essentialism marginalizes us anyway, so everybody's got to be the same. So that's showing up. They've marginalized me. But then on top of that, they stigmatize me. And it didn't matter that I had a job, that I had made decent money and had decent health insurance. I was still seen as nothing and nobody, to then to be discharged to a homeless clinic. Not to mention all the other things, but this is how the healthcare system shows up in our lives. They take the children from mothers. You have this long line of children who are in foster care, and they red flag all of our Black children, and they remove them from the home. So for him or whoever that is, I like their name because I'd like to send them a letter. This racism shows up in healthcare in every way. And we've only gotten, as I said, some benevolence in it because now they've claimed racism as a public health crisis. It's a resolution. It hasn't resolved anything. And so for them these are the ways that it shows up, and it continues to show up, and it shows up in silent ways. And they do think we can just take pain after pain, because I wasn't offered anything. Even when I gave a vacuum delivery, they didn't give me any anesthesia. They stuck that vacuum in me and pulled my child out. That's how healthcare treats us, especially women, because of those things that are connected to eugenics and all of that during slavery.
Talk a little bit more about that, and then we'll hear from Dr. Smith, Dr. Dean.
Hearing her experiences traumatized me.
Yeah.
I hear those stories over and over again from so many people of color, Black women who tell these stories who have been traumatized. I apologize. I'm so sorry you had to have that experience, because no one should ever have to go through that. And as you were telling, I'm thinking, what if you could not advocate for yourself? What if you were someone who did not have health insurance and access to medical care and all these other things? Like, how does that show up? So it's just, it's painful to hear these stories because, I can go so many directions, but when you talk about your experience, I'm thinking about the enslaved women who were under the knife of J. Marion Sims. People don't know who J. Marion Sims is, but he is the father of gynecology. And he used enslaved Black women to perform his surgeries and his medical experiments, and did not provide any type of anesthesia to those enslaved women, mutilating their bodies. So many enslaved women. I think about Henrietta Lacks and her body and what we've done to her. And we can just go on, Venus, Sarah Bartman is another, what we've done to her and her body. So how do we reconcile that? So when we talk about generational pain and trauma, I think this is what we talk about. I think about what you just said, Bishop Dinkins, about the foster care system, because I am a foster parent, and I get so many young boys into my home who come with medications that they've gotten since they've been in the system. And because I'm not their parent, I can't advocate for them to be off of those medicines, because I see what it does to them when they're in my home, how they become loopy and lethargic. And so if you don't give them the medicine, they can take the child to your house and they can mark your house as a home and put you off the market for like 30 days or 60 days. So you can't take any more kids in. So I'm trying to find ways of how do I advocate for this child who has been given these pills, and I'm looking them up and seeing what they do to these kids. And they're in the system that's re-traumatizing them over and over again. So I'm trying to find out, how do I advocate if in that system, the best medical care for children and who are being damaged mentally and physically by the system. So you're absolutely right. The system has done and continues to do so much damage to foster kids. But I'm also thinking too about what you said about advocating for ourselves. And I don't think we've had that opportunity to find out, how do we help one another to advocate? Like, is there a policy place or persons in place who can help us to navigate these systems, to help us to navigate these medical traumas and entanglements that keep us dismembered spiritually. Because a lot of us don't want to seek treatment or healthcare for fear of what they may do to our body, or for fear of what they're going to prescribe to us to fix a wound, as opposed to addressing every institutional oppressive system that has kept us diseased, mentally, like you said, the church has done a mental and emotional trauma to so many of us without providing healing. And I think about the police officers who kill with impunity within our communities, and the trauma, and I don't think anyone has addressed this, and if they have, let me know. But I think about what it means to live in that community on a day-to-day basis and to have to walk past a spot where someone was killed, or to drive by that, for kids who have to walk past that, for kids to also have to normalize that in their neighborhood and saying, that's the spot where George Floyd was killed. That's the house where Ma'Khia Bryant lived, where she was shot and killed. We live within those same traumatized experiences on a day-to-day basis. So where is our healing? Who comes in to help us to restore our communities around those traumatic experiences so that we don't have to keep reliving them over and over again? So I'm just going to leave that there.
Dr. Smith?
This is so sobering, because the internalized trauma that has come from generations of oppression is very real. And we as a people have been carrying that for 400 years. We've been carrying it, and it has contributed to a host of mental, emotional, and physical ailments. But as you were talking, Bishop Marcia, I was remembering how I had an experience with my son. We're talking about, how gender fits into this, but this is kind of, it kind of relates. My son had a boil on his behind, and it was bad. And so he was at the hospital. He was in extreme pain, had high fever because the thing had infected, right? So they had to come and had to lance the boil. And I was with him. And this doctor came in. There were two doctors. One was white and one was some other nationality. And they gave him something for pain. My son has a high tolerance for pain. I mean, it's just how he is. He has a high tolerance for pain. So they gave him this medicine, and it didn't knock him out. They thought it should knock him out, but it didn't. So they came in and they gave him some more. And then the one doctor said, well, he's already had enough, and I think something is wrong. And I went to the mother bear mode because I knew exactly what they were saying. And I said, he has a high tolerance for pain. If he's still feeling it, you can't do what you're getting ready to do until you give him something for pain. And I said, and I need for you to know with my mouth that he's not a drug addict. And I got your name and your number, and I am going to go to the president of the hospital when this is done and report your behavior. I think that we have to claim our power. We as women, we have to claim our power. We have so much power. We as Black people in general, but we have to claim it and we have to use it. Didn't I march right on up there? I surely did to report it. I don't know that anything was actually done to either of those doctors. I mean, I gave the names. I didn't want to stand around and see what happened to them, but I wanted that institution to know that, dang it, we are human beings. And if somebody has a high tolerance for pain, it is not your job to make a judgment and withhold medical attention because of what you think we are, because you don't know. You don't know. I think that we have been taught to be quiet. Just ticks me off. Every time something happens, the first thing out of the media is that, oh, they're going to be mad. Yeah, we're going to be mad. You would be mad too. That's a normal thing. They want us to be quiet. They want us to kind of like Laura Ingraham said, shut up and dribble. That's their thing. But all of these, we the women, I mean, when you mess with our kids, Marcia, you know what I'm talking about. You mess with our kids, church is out. And we ought to feel bold enough to say, you know, I don't care what happens to me. You are not going to mess with my kids. But unfortunately, we've been taught to be quiet. It's kind of the by and by mentality. You know, if we just be quiet and go along to get along, then when we get to heaven, and I'm saying heaven is on earth, and that we as women can use our power and create some parity, some equity, something here on this earth. We just have to get away from that which we have been taught. It makes us feel, not only because of racism, but because of sexism too. Because our Black men are just as much in it as the white men. You know, that's what I'm saying. White supremacy is not only about racism, it's about sexism as well. And it's about ageism, and it's about all of that other stuff. It's a whole great big mixture of things. And all of these people who are affected need to understand how that has come and put a hat over our heads and take that daggone hat off and claim who we are. But Black women, you know, we have, if you go back to Mamie Till, you know, things would change, because Mamie said, oh no, you're not going to kill my baby, and ain't nobody going to see what you did to him. That took a lot of strength. That took a lot of courage. And we as Black women need to claim that and use that, and I think support each other in it, so that we can make some dents. I don't know that we do it as much as we can, but we can make some dents. We have power.
And we want to really shift and begin to talk a little bit more about sexism, the intersections of sexism and racism, in terms of justice. But I thought about something that you said, and it kind of propelled me to this thought about the fact that stress resides in the body, and that our experiences live in our bodies and manifest often in our bodies. How do we begin to look at better personal health with the everyday stress that we as African Americans in this country experience every day? Wondering if it's this or if it's that. Is it really a legit traffic stop, or is it this? Or, you know, all the things that we encounter on a daily basis, what does that look like in terms of how we handle the actual stress that does live in the body as a result of who we are? Bishop?
You know, Kima, that's a good question, because I don't think we handle it. We don't handle it. I mean, part of it is, you know, and I think it's Judith Herman who wrote the book, The Body That Keeps the Score, and how we hold in, you know, the body holds in that trauma. Part of it is a lot of these things we don't even know what to name. And when you don't know, when you can't name it, you can't confront it, and you can't heal from it. And when your life is just a whirlwind of, I don't think we've really been given the tools on even how to diminish the whirlwind, and to see what's what. Because right now, Black lives, Black bodies, you know, it's a threat to it every day, and there's this urgency around it. And when that's the way, you have to take on that posture. You have to change your position to take on that posture. It's hard. As a mother who has two sons, a 20-year-old and a 15-year-old, I think about that. I think about how when my son goes to work, I often say to him, tell me where you're going. Just say where you're going, and let me know which car you took, and that comes from not just that place of a mother loving. It comes from that place of something happens to him, then I know. It comes from the thoughts in my mind. Oh, Lord, please don't let my son get pulled over. Oh, Lord, please don't let that truck that's driving down, Brant Pike with the Trump sign on one, still driving with a Trump sign on one side and a Confederate sign on another side. Oh, Lord, he's working here in this job. Please don't let the wrong white person or racist or person full of hatred enter this job. You're constantly thinking about the life that you birthed, and that life being at risk. So I don't think we know how to deal with the stressor, especially when every day you don't even get every day you don't get an opportunity to breathe inside of it. I do workshops.
No opportunity to breathe.
None.
Wow.
And so I do work around trauma-informed approaches and have been working and helping people, even clergy, with trauma-informed approaches to ministry. But we don't get it, we don't get an opportunity. And when your body is already racked with trauma, and then we go out, and that's another thing, then we're exposed to trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And then the places that we sit in that want us to have conversations and want to know our story, they just re-traumatize us. And then we look at television and then we're re-traumatized again. And then you go to bed with that and you sleeping with your trauma. You waking up with your trauma. At what point in time do we really confront or deal with the trauma, let alone look at intergenerational, transgenerational, and multi-generational? We just trying to get through this one-dimensional trauma that continues to keep lashing out at us, and we're walking around with lacerated hearts because, some parts of that we have to protect. So I don't think we have the tools yet. I really don't think we have the tools to confront it. Healing is a process, an everyday process. But every day we have to bury a new person, a new child.
Yeah.
That's just another drumbeat to the trauma that we're already in rhythm and in sync with. And we don't even know it. A lot of us don't even acknowledge or realize we've been traumatized because we've been zombified by the trauma.
I think you're absolutely right, but I would like to extend what I say, because I'm in the process of healing, but I do want to talk about this re-traumatization that occurs. I think that we as a community have the power to stop media, because I think we consume Black death. It makes it, normalizes it for us, and it normalizes it for white persons, which is why they have impunity to feel that they can continue to do what they do over and over again. Because television and media, what they do is they say, what you're about to see is graphic footage, right? But then they show it to us anyway. So it's like, well, if you're about to show it to us, you're warning us. So what you're saying is that you're going to partake into your own death. We want you to consume this. So I turn those things off. I don't recirculate those types of videos. I don't even watch those type of videos. And I tell other people, do not watch them. Write to your local television stations and tell them, we do not need you to re-traumatize us and to keep circulating those images over and over again. Because what it's doing is psychologically programming us to think it's okay. That when now we're having this argument in social media where people are saying, particularly Black persons, many of them saying, well, the police officer had a right to shoot Ma'Khia Bryant. Right, so now we've become so traumatized to seeing Black people get shooting and being killed on television. Now we're even justifying it. So we got to be very careful around that. And the reason I also make that argument is, like you said, Bishop Dinkins, I remember Trayvon Martin's mother, Tamir Rice's mother, and all these mothers who had lost their children to police violence and persons have been killed. And they said, people say, say their name. People want to talk about they're doing these art installations around our kids and, they're doing this in the name of justice. They said, but every time you do that, we have to relive it over and over and over again. So I always tell people, I said, I understand you want to say their name and keep their names alive, but you also have to think about what that means for the family. Because they also reclaim some type of partial trauma for them, because now they have to relive it over and over again. What that means for that family. So I don't think we ever think about that. We think that we're doing a justice for our own healing, but I'm like, well, what about the family's healing? We have to need to think about that, which is why I talk about this, the pain that happens within our own communities, that we have to walk past those spots, those markers that become institutionalized, where we say, that's the place where so-and-so was killed. That's the place where so-and-so died. So I'm very mindful to be careful of consuming that. The other thing, when I say that I've gotten to the process of my own personal healing, is that I found a Black woman who does natural healing. She says, I don't dwell in Western medicine. She said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to help you to heal. She said, because your body already knows what to do and it's telling you what to do. You have to pay attention. And she has given me so much help around meditation, around foods and how to help heal my body, around how to start doing the healing and negotiating around what it means to be in conversation and community with other persons, to help heal each other, telling and being authentic in our conversations. So that has been extremely helpful for me around doing that necessary work that my body already knows. All of our body knows what it needs. Like as Dr. Smith said, that pain does sit in us. And if your lower back is hurting you and your upper shoulder is killing you and all, we talk about those pains and we say, well, I'm gonna take some aspirin or I'm gonna get a massage and that's gonna take care of. No, your body is trying to tell you something. There's a trauma there that needs to be healed. So how do you heal that trauma? So that's when you start doing the internal work. But I want to go back to these foster kids that I take in because I'm very intentional about taking in Black boys. Because I'm in Ohio, and I remember asking my foster agency, I said, well, how many Black men do you all have that are very involved in taking in foster children? And they said, well, including you. I said, yes. They said, well, we only have 3 Black men who are taking in foster children. And I said, so you mean to tell me that you can't find other Black men who want to get involved in? Because I realized that it's the important work of when these kids who have been traumatized over and over again, going from house to house, going from place to place, being told that they're not enough, being used, being abused by a system, and we can talk about the people in the system who use the system to utilize it for capital gain, getting kids, many kids as they possibly can for financial purposes. I live in a primarily white community. I can't tell you how many times I see these white families with these Black babies, and they don't take, and it's interesting, they will not take anyone over 5 or 8 years old. So they always have little Black babies. And I'm like, interesting that they would want to take in little Black babies. They don't want to take in the young children, above 5 or 10, and teenagers. But I remember I was in conversation with one foster mother, a white woman. She had 2 Black kids and they were young. She said, I wish they would have called you because I think they would have been better with you. She said, my family, I haven't told my father yet. And she said, you know what I mean by that? And I said, no, I don't want to know. I want you to explicitly tell me what you mean by that. Yeah, I haven't told my father yet that I have these Black children in my home because I'm afraid of what he may say and what he may do. And I said, wow. I said, so why did you take these children if you knew that you didn't want Black children? And she said, well, we are retired, me and my husband, and this is our way of earning extra money. So I got what you're saying, Dr. Dinkins, and what we said earlier, Dr. Smith, slavery hasn't ended. It's continued. The fact that they're saying the commodification and we can make money off of getting all these little children and on our home and can make money off of them. So that bothered me. And I called my agency and I tried to advocate to get those 2 kids and they would not let me get those 2 kids because they said the mother, that foster mother would have to relinquish her willingness to have them in her home. And I called her and I said, well, you already told me you don't want the 2 kids. Why don't you just let me have them? And she said, no, she would not let them 2 children go. So yes, the system continues to fail us. And there's a lot of work that we need to do around healing, and we can do that healing, collective healing. And I think there's work being done in that space. And I think that's you're right. How do we make space for that healing and trauma? I think the Black church can also play a huge part of that. I know a lot of churches that are intentional about helping, providing resources, mental health, therapy, yoga, all of that. Whatever you find your spiritual practice that works for you. But find someone who knows you culturally, who knows what it means to experience trauma on a day-to-day basis, as you said. We wake up in it, we live it, we inherit it, we carry it. So we need someone who knows how to deal with that. And I think that may be a calling for those of those who are looking to do that work. That may be a calling for those to get into the medical field to help us to do that type of work.
I appreciate you. Go ahead, Dr. Smith.
I was going to add something too. We're talking about how sexism is a part of this thing, and I wonder, and I ache for mothers. I ache for mothers because there's nothing worse than being a mother and aching for your child. And maybe you have grown up, being rejected, so you don't know how to give love, but you still love, that kind of weird thing, but you're aching all of the time. I heard a story yesterday about DMX and his mom. Some kid said to me, "Oh, he died of drugs." I said, "Well, no, he died of a massive heart attack." And then I started, talking about some of the stuff because he did have a troubled life. But this is what got me. He said he had a mom who first of all, used to beat his daddy all of the time. His mom used to beat his father and beat him so much that the father left the home. But then after the father was gone, she didn't have anybody to beat. So she started beating DMX and the other siblings. And so he got in trouble because he was getting beaten so much that he said, well, I might as well be bad. My point is that she was beating. When you do something like that and you beat a human being, then you love them, you birth them. That's some pain. That is a pain-driven action. So she one day took him to a playground and she said, "You like this playground?" And he said, "Yeah." She said, "Good, because this is your new home." And she abandoned him. She abandoned him on that playground. And my heart just fell out because even, when you are traumatized as a woman, you might not take your kid to a playground, but you abandon them emotionally because you have to find the way to cope with all of the stuff that you're coping with. Maybe your mama, didn't love you, maybe, so you carry, that's that generational thing. But she left that kid in a playground and said, this is your home. It like to kill me to hear that. And I think there are so many stories, and I know you all have seen, women who are just in so much pain. Instead of talking to their kids, they yell at them and scream at them and cuss them out. And so they begin to understand or believe that love only exists when somebody is cussing you out and putting you down. That's that trauma. That's what this racist culture does. You carry the trauma. You don't know what to do with it. We don't have anywhere to talk about it. In our culture, if you go talk to a culture, then people say you don't believe in Jesus, which is crazy. Sometimes you just need to find somebody to talk to. Just get it out because that stuff builds up.
Yeah.
So I just keep thinking about how many of us as mothers, how many women have abandoned their children, even if they're all in the same house, because they're trying to get by. We got to go to work. I can't fool with you. So, and I can't sit here and make you eat your greens and your broccoli because I got to go work 4 jobs because this culture doesn't pay me a living. See how it's all mixed up together. And here you are, a woman, you want to be like Leave It to Beaver's mom to your kids too, but you cannot do it. So that has to hurt. Your inability to do what you want to do and need to do has to hurt. And I think it has a devastating effect on our culture in general.
Yeah.
Let me say this because I need to kind of switch gears. I want to talk a little bit about some other areas and kind of some intersections between sexism and racism. And we've touched on it a little bit, but want to take a moment to kind of examine experiences and your thoughts regarding how sexism, how racism, as they intersect, what does that look like in terms, if we're looking through a justice lens, what does that look like as we look at it through a justice lens? Any thoughts, Bishop?
Ooh, goodness, that's that, because as I'm listening to you, Kima, I'm like, does it have to just sit with racism? Because sexism crosses borders. And, and I see it in so many different places. And so the stereotyping, the discriminatory practices that take place, inside of colorism, and not just racism. And so when I think of my own personal experience, it wasn't so much from a racist lens as much as it was a sexist lens. And what I mean by that is I often tell people, as a Black woman, I guess the racist part is I have to fight from the birthing room to the boardroom. And that's where sexism and racism intersects. And then from a spiritual aspect of it, I have to fight from the parking lot to the pulpit. So then there's the stereotyping, the prejudice, and where I see racism playing a part in that is it still goes back to what supremacy says. And it doesn't even have to be white. It's just what supremacy says. Who should be in charge? Who's the one that's qualified to do this? I had somebody say to me, "Oh, Bishop, as a woman, we can do a lot, but men," and everything inside of me exploded. And racism has perpetuated a narrative that we have, that has, again, and I don't think we can get rid of the word, that has normalized responses in ways that we as Black women or women are treated, how we as women are seen in the workplace, the church place, anywhere we go. It's always active. It feels like it's just active everywhere you go. And so I think for me, it's not just at the intersection of racism. I think racism is just the section, is the main lane, and we just kind of meet it at its, it converges, in a sense, because racism has perpetuated all of these things, and so. And I think the problem is where we find ourselves always being confronted at in this is we think we can talk about racism without talking about gender, when you can't. And so when you already exclude someone from the conversation, how do you even begin to address those issues? And so, I think for me, it's just really grappling with, is it an intersection? Or is it the father of, and people are just responding and we're getting treated because that's how daddy patriarchy said you got to treat them. That slavery said you, because we got divided in so many different ways. And these are just successive behaviors that we have normalized and continue to progress because we have not as a people, we don't realize it. And when you say to some Black people, man, that's just normalized, white behavior, supremacy, patriarchy, they don't think about it. And so I don't think it intersects. I think it's the father of, and we just get the brunt of it. And then it's the exclusionary part of never wanting to put women even inside of the conversation, to have to talk about race and gender.
Dr. Dean, I see you thinking.
Yeah, because I pluralize it. Their genders and sexualities, and I think that's the conversation we really have to delve into. And I think that makes it more complex. I saw you, Reverend Kima, you especially shifted. Because we have to think about our trans community. We have to think about those who are non-gender conforming. We have to think about those who are non-sexual identifying. What does that mean for them? I think we tend to, normalize male and female relatively quickly, and race perpetuates that. We continue to marginalize those persons who do not identify into the norms. Everything that Bishop Dinkins is saying, patriarchy, the father of all of this, white supremacy, all of that has, created these normalized ideologies, how we position ourselves, position people, how we mimic, we talk about mimetic discourse. Black persons continue to mimeticize this. Even in the queer communities, they try to normalize heteronormative ideologies. And I think that's very dangerous. We need to create new conversations. And how do we disrupt these conversations? We create new language. We create new discourses. And that's that's what the possibility is. And I think that's what the Bible and what God is also talking about. Like, we create the new possibilities of all these things because the world is ever evolving, and I think that's what God gives us, the greatness around the forcefulness of language. We can all speak to, into, and for. So, we have that power. Start preaching up in here. Jesus already told us, these things I do, you better do them many more. So we dealing with it on a basic level. Like, when is Jesus and you going to start, showing up? That's what I'm looking for. Let that Jesus show up.
I mean, I think it's what you're saying is it is about the power to embrace me showing up in non-validated ways, in my own skin, believing in who I am, and that I have to have enough faith in me to be able to show up that way.
Just like, and I love one of my favorite biblical stories is the Syrophoenician woman who goes and interrupts and knocks on the door, knowing they telling her Jesus in there, he rested, he chilling, he ain't seeing people today. She said, well, he gonna see me today. Yes.
And pushing past all of those who viewed her as why are you even here?
Right.
Yeah. What do you even do? You don't belong in this space.
Right.
And the declaration or decision that I do now. Yeah, I do now. Yeah, definitely. I want to kind of switch gears a little bit. And I want to talk a little bit about prison system. As we look at the prison system, and just help me with the way that I phrase this question, can we talk about the benefit of filling prisons with Black and brown bodies, moved from metropolitan or urban places into rural places where now I'm counted in the number there, but I can't vote, of course. So can we talk a little bit about that, and particularly in terms as we're looking at all of this going on with voter suppression now, state of Georgia, of course, but Georgia's not the only place, so we shouldn't get it twisted that we need to keep our eyes open because it's occurring in many other states as well. Maybe just not as prevalent and not what the media is feeding us. While we're all looking at Georgia, there's stuff happening in other states as well. But let's talk a little bit about the benefit of filling prisons with Black and brown bodies, especially for profit.
I was going to pass it to Dr. Susan, but I just want to correct one thing is that they don't just move them from one to. They automatic. I mean, when you think, and I'm not sure if everybody here is from Ohio, because I don't really know everybody. Okay, everybody is. Where are all the prisons at in Ohio? The majority of them in the rural community.
In the country, yeah,
and so the part of the benefit is, number one, we have to look at, they get dollars for them being there. So when the census is taken, rather than they're getting counted. That's one way of those communities being able to have an economic flow to their communities.
The rural community, you mean, where the prison
to the rural, but it's not just rural. And I don't know if Youngstown is considered rural, but they have the Supermax prison where they had reopened that up. It was a private prison, but we're holding the immigrants, when they were being arrested.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not just sitting in that rural space where it's creating an economic flow. It's been utilized in a lot of places to generate income in other communities.
Mm-hmm.
And not only that, to move them from place to place to place as another means to generate income. And so that becomes the benefit, because it's not about, we already know, it's not about rehabilitation. It's really about how much, re-enslaving, because we know the 13th Amendment did not free, it just says that, another person can own another person this way. But when you get into the state now owns you. And so that in and of itself, and that just becomes that way of getting yet again getting that slave labor. And then we have to look at the historical context from the rural areas that, because they were erected for economic opportunities. And then when you think about the redneck, that came about because those unqualified people who were white people were in the prison serving as the POs. So it becomes this way of I'm going to say, of a livelihood. And as long as that becomes that economic flow for a community, they're not going to fight it. They're not going to fight it at all. And we have to remember that. And we also have to remember how many of those people, when those prisons are in those communities, how many people within their own community have to get incarcerated as well. So it's just like, as I said earlier, it's just a different way. It's not a different way. That's so untrue. It's just another form of continuation.
Another method.
Method. Thank you. Yeah. To continue to slave and re-enslave, to get free labor, to create, capitalism, while also traumatizing, demoralizing, dehumanizing them, not giving them access to anything when they come out, and then putting another set of barriers out there for them when they get out called collateral consequences or sanctions that still don't allow them to get anything. And so then they get right back and they go right back into the system. And so it's just, it's just the mouth of the beast that's always open.
Dr. Dean?
It's what we started this whole entire conversation with. We are not human beings. We are still property. Because even when you are in that state system of incarceration, when you leave, you are still part of the state system of incarceration because you are on parole and probation. You have to parole, you have to report to a governmental agency. So you are still 3/5 of a human being. If you have a felony, you can't vote. If you have a felony, you can't get certain types of jobs. Definitely not a governmental job. That's very difficult to get governmental jobs if you have a felony. You can't work in a bank. It all depends on what type of felony you have. You can't work in the education system. So again, that's locking out people of color. So if you can't get a job, you can't vote, you can't live in certain communities, you can't live in governmental housing, you can't go back to school to better yourself because if you have a felony, it's a federal loan. Anything related to the government, if you have a felony, you cannot have access to. And because federal loans are given to students, you cannot get a federal loan to help you get access to an education. So now that we've blocked out a disproportionate number of people from participating in what we call the American system, again and again, I want you all to hear this. We have locked out over 1 million participants who can possibly vote, have access to economic stability, education, lock them completely out of the system from participating as what? Full Americans. Right now, with all those things, limitations happening to you, you are 3/5 of a human being and you're still owned by the state. So that's what I want to get back to. You talking about racial justice, we talking about human justice right here. We got to talk about that. Once we dismantle what human justice and what the system continues to tell us that, oh, we're helping out humanity. We know this is good for the right of the people. It's not good for the right of the people. Because what people are you talking to? Your own white constituents? You're not talking to the Black communities. You're not talking to those of us who are suffering, those of us who have been on the receiving end of what it means when you have put your foot on our necks for 400 years. So George Floyd is only just a reminder for many of us to see that and the physical manifestation of what happened. So don't tell us about pain and suffering and about what the system does. You still do not see us as human beings. We're still 3/5. So we need to talk about human justice.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is that I was reading a book called The Body Keeps Score. and it's about healing from trauma. And so it's that idea that all of that lives in our bodies, all of this trauma, all of this, the daily stressors, but it lives in the body. Dr. Smith, did you have anything?
No, they pretty much covered it. I just wanted to say that the mass incarceration then contributes to the despair of our people. It employs people in the rural areas, that's for sure. So mass incarceration is not likely to be eliminated because we're helping some people get jobs, but it destroys our communities. It destroys them. And the more our communities are destroyed because of the poverty and all that stuff, the worse the conditions get. And so it then creates a seedbed for police officers to go in and, attack our people and put more people in prison. And it is disgraceful. The other thing that I thought of as both Bishop and Dr. Dean were talking was that Black women are bearing the brunt of carrying the community, even when they don't get jobs that are decent. I mean, they can't take care of their children. I did not know that until very recently that some women, many of our people, are working in the service industries and industries that again make white people very wealthy, and they work in these restaurants, food, and they make so little money that they can't even be taxed. What in the world is that? And they're expected to take care of their family. So they go out, they get 2 and 3 jobs, they're never with their children. The cycle continues because of the conditions that are created in this capitalistic world, fed by patriarchy, sexism, and all of that stuff. We are still colonials. We are still being colonized in our own country.
I am so honored to have been with you all today. I want to check and look in the comments section and see if there are any questions. There's tons of comments, really good ones, but I don't see any questions. If you have any questions, you probably have another minute or two to put them in there, and we'll try and address them. But as we close today, when we think about a just society, we often think about citizen participation in the political process. What can we do as a voting community to make the kinds of changes to impact these systemic forms of racism? Or is that part of the pathway to doing that? What are your thoughts on that as we close today?
Just a quick sentence. I think we can work to make our people understand that we do have power. So many of us will not vote because we don't think we have power, but we do have power. If we didn't have power, they wouldn't be working so hard to keep us from the polls. And so we have to let them know. Yeah, that's all I want to say on that.
Dr. Dean?
Last comment?
Absolutely. Yep. Yes, sir.
I want us to just continue to love on each other, celebrate each other, embrace each other. I think we need to, work together to find healing spaces. I like, Bishop Dinkins, her story was her testimony, but that's what this was a testimony service. So, so I want to thank you for sharing your testimony, both of you, Dr. Smith and Dr. Dinkins, because those stories need to be told, because it helps us to heal. And when we can tell those stories, it helps our community to see, what forces we need to create for ourselves in order to build solidarity, and how to refute these types of systems that continues to want to marginalize and oppress us. So the more we keep telling our stories, and I know, again, I don't want, like I said, we don't want to re-traumatize anyone. But your story has been a source of healing and inspiration for me, because hearing that really, truly helped me to see, like, wow, we have a lot of work to do. So I really appreciate you both for doing that.
Yes. Bishop?
Thank you for that. 1, 2, 3. Number one, we got to quit. We have to quit saying just. When we talk about just, that's retributive. A lot of people don't realize that. I had actually was doing some research, and I was going to do something on the Just Society, and really historically, that really was something more retributive, and we want to move to, as Dr. Dean said, move towards more healing. I don't think we should, and I'm not saying we don't go out and vote, because we do and we should, but I don't think we should get so caught up in thinking that the policies are ever going to have an agenda that's really inclusive of us, because of how this foundation how this foundation was already built, or what it was built upon, and understanding that inside of one policy is another policy. So you're just dealing with a policy inside of a policy that we have to chip away at. And until we really even understand policy analysis and the difference between the public agenda and the private agenda, and all of those things where we need to educate ourselves. We don't always have that participatory voting, but we do need to vote, but we can't do what Georgia did, like in Ohio, because it's just not enough of us. And lastly, I think for me, where I'm at is where Dr. Dean is at, in healing for change. And so that's what my organization does. And we believe in that because healing is a form of resistance, a form of justice and transformation. And and we can use healing for change to heal from all of the oppressions, because the truth of the matter is, until we begin to heal, we're still going to be fighting, and we're still going to be fighting and being more harmful one to another. So we need to, first of all, figure out how do we individually heal and grieve together, so that we can collectively heal and grieve together, using, as we believe, healing as a form of resistance, I say it again, of justice and transformation.
I am so incredibly grateful, as we prepare to end our time together today, to have been able to just sit and listen to your prophetic thoughts, and some of the ideas that you have about how we need to move forward. We are going to prepare. It's 2 minutes to 1, so we want to prepare to come back to Dr. Geraldine to make some announcements about what is coming up in the in-between time, but also this afternoon's panel. Dr. Susan Smith, Bishop Marcia Dinkins, Dr. Terrance Dean. It was an absolute honor to be with you all, and I hope this is not the last time that we cross paths. It has been a blessing.
Thank you, Kima. Thank you so much.
Amen.
It's really an honor to be here. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. You just did an outstanding job. Thank you, Reverend Kima, for the thought-provoking questions. When we think about racial justice, we think about this idea of what does it mean to be seen as human, or let alone be treated as such. Thank you for your question around public health. When you asked that question, it reminded me that the Public Theology and Racial Justice Collaborative did an entire conference last summer on revisiting medical apartheid, with Harriet Washington being our keynote speaker, and several days of panels with doctors, medical practitioners, etc., and scholars. And we just had several days of an outstanding conversation around public health. Thank you for the question to help us see the internal trauma that African American people carry within our bodies each and every moment that we see the injustice occurring. Questions on sexism, the intersection of sexism and racism. We think about the prison system, voting, all of these issues are so engaging. And it is my hope that on Saturday, our audience, as well as the panel participants, will be able to engage these topics much more. I would like to say again, thank you to Reverend Kima for guiding us. Thank you to Bishop Dinkins, Thank you to Reverend Dr. Susan Smith, and thank you to Dr. Terrance Dean. On behalf of Dr. Teresa Smallwood and the Public Theology and Racial Justice, we are so thankful for your presence today and the conversation. As we prepare to transition to our afternoon panel, as I mentioned on the front end, but those that may have joined us just a little bit later, there will be a concert performed by the group called Hue People, as you can see on the screen here. They will begin playing in the next few minutes on the link that will take you to the afternoon panel that will occur at 1:00 p.m. Central Time, 2:00 Eastern Time. So during this lunch phase of the next hour, Hue People will perform their concert, and then we will join with our second panelist. Again, use the second link for the afternoon, meaning we will sign off of this one and transfer over to the afternoon link. Thanks again, everyone. On behalf of Reverend Dr. Teresa Smallwood, God bless you, and may the Lord continue to keep you in all the many ways that you engage in the classroom, in your writing, in your pulpits, and in your broad way of doing ministry.